Hello, boys and girls. I thought today, just to be different, I would read to you a story from the Bible. Now, I went through several different versions of the Bible, and I wasn't able to find a version that I thought was appropriate for children. So I have gone through and made notes and come up with my own version of the story. And I'm just going to read this, and I hope it's not too adult. I never had any children of my own, so it's really hard for me to have a good concept of what is PG-13 and what is considered rated G. But we'll go through this, and if any parents out there think that this is a little too graphic for children, please leave me a note and we'll see what we can do about making this more wholesome for young, sensitive ears. Okay. Once upon a time, there was an all-powerful, all-knowing God who existed everywhere. He was not physical, but a spirit. And for as long as existence had existed, so had he. He had no beginning, no birth date, or creation date, and no creator. Though he knew everything, no greater intelligence had existed prior to his existence to create him, nor had he just popped into being one day, for that would imply there was a time when he didn't exist, and he has always existed. So a long time passed where this God simply existed, and he was so lonely. He occupied everywhere, and the everywhere was completely empty and dark, except for him, and he always had existed, for the reason that something needs to exist to fill all the space. And it came to pass, after an eternity of existing, that this God decided to himself that he wasn't being appreciated enough for all this existing he did for absolutely no reason, and in absolute emptiness. So he decided to make some companions for himself, underlings that he could rule over, who would be properly awed by him and give him lots of compliments on a continual basis. First, he made angels who hovered above and below him and praised him with words and song. They were very pretty and pleasing for a while, but they were perfect and unfailing. Really very boring company. And he knew ahead of time everything they were going to do and every word they were going to say. So in the end, they did nothing to alleviate his boredom or make his existence more interesting. So then this God decided to make some angels who had a mind of their own. He made them with the same vanity that he possessed, all the same pride. So there would be conflict he'd have to deal with, and punishment he'd get to dole out when one of them disobeyed, which he, of course, knew one of them would because he could see the future. And in fact, he made one angel specifically for this purpose, to become his arch enemy, someone he could grapple with and bet against. Just ask Job. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead. But what really did they have to fight about? Which part of everything they each would get to occupy? This would be okay in the short term, but how boring it would become after, well, even more eternity of just existing for no reason. So God decided to make a race of mini-me's he could rule over. He'd make them perfect, and so they would live forever. And he would be like their dad, their provider and protector against his adversary, whom he had made first. So first he made himself radiant to create light everywhere, and that way he could see what he was doing. And then he made a planet out of a bunch of star stuff he found floating around And on that planet, he separated water from dirt, and then he made some trees. But something was missing, so he created a star and a moon and other planets with moons to orbit around the first planet. This star and moon created light on the planet so he could lower his radiance at this point and still be able to see what he was doing. Plus, also it helped keep the trees he had made first from rapidly shriveling up and freezing to death. That was pretty smart of him, huh? Then God made creatures to swim in the water and other creatures to walk on the ground. And from dirt he made men and women who he called Adam and Lilith, both of whom he made in his image, knowing ahead of time that Adam was going to let him down and that the children of Adam would eventually become so corrupt he would be forced to drown the whole lot of them. Unborn fetuses too, but chose to make them anyway because that would give him something to do. Meanwhile, Lilith, Adam's first wife, he made knowing ahead of time she would defy Adam in bed. But rather than just make Eve from Adam's rib and skip the whole step of making Lilith, God still made Lilith anyway, from the dust at the same time that he made Adam, knowing all the while that she would prove herself unsuitable for Adam. But why should that stop God from all the excitement and fun of getting to turn Lilith into a winged she-demon so she could go around snuffing out the breath of little babies? Isn't this a beautiful story? So then, once Lilith is gotten rid of, God makes Eve from Adam's rib this time, and in the image of Adam, so Adam has someone to boss around. Adam is pleased, and as a result, we get to see depicted in many classic masterpieces a cowering woman beside Adam, rather than the proud, bare-chested vixen that Lilith was. Then God's adversary, Satan, whom God had cast into the garden before he placed his trusting and ignorant creation, Adam and Eve, there, slinks out of hiding just as God knew he would, to tempt Eve, who succumbs to the temptation just as God knew she would. Then God comes into the garden acting all surprised and disappointed, like he didn't already know ahead of time all this would come to pass. He curses Adam and Eve for being made by he himself ignorant of right and wrong, and therefore succumbing to the temptation of his clever adversary Satan, whom he had planted in the garden ahead of time as a way to make original sin happen. Because after all, how boring would it be for God if he didn't have humans to boss around? Anyway, fast forward a couple of incestuous generations to the time of Noah, and now God is carrying out the massive slaughter of all the people he made, knowing ahead of time he'd be drowning them all as punishment for the fact that he didn't make the humans right the first time around. Except, of course, Noah, who is the only good and righteous man in the lot, and his family, whom God spares and gives Noah magical powers, allowing him to collect in record time a male and female of every animal, including the dinosaurs, although later this number was changed depending on whether or not the animals were clean enough to eat. And also special tanks were built on the ark to house the sea-dwelling creatures who would have otherwise died when so much fresh water was mixed with all that salt water. Oh, and then special animal poop dumb waders were added to lift all the manure shoveled from the stalls by Noah's hard-working family every hour of every single day. These dumbwaiters were powered by harnessed squirrels that would run around and around on little wheels deep inside the ark. Of course, these little engineering marvels were never mentioned in the original telling of this tale, because after all, we didn't want to get too technical that the Bronze Age primitives being inspired by God couldn't write all this down because they couldn't understand. So anyway, it rained a lot. And the only good and righteous man on the planet sat inside his ark and proceeded to ignore all the shrieks of terror and agony from his neighbors pounding on the hull of the ark until their knuckles bled. This good and righteous man obeyed God fervently and listened to the begging and the cries and the wails of the little children and old people and the sick and the injured and the blind and the lame and the pregnant women and young mothers with newborn infants, not to mention all the animals, both wild and domesticated, who had done nothing whatsoever displeasing to God, all pleading with him to please open the door. But being that he was so good and so loyal to God, he ignored the plight of all these people, and the happy little boat sailed away into the soggy sunset. Then, of course, came many more incestuous years as the drunkard Noah's sons and daughters married each other and went about breeding in vast numbers to repopulate the planet. Of course, all this inbreeding created a lot of genetically unfit versions of humans. Though this happened with other animal species too. That's how you explain all the different versions of the elephant that were running around. That modern day scientists have mistaken as proof of evolution, but which are in fact the result of picking the wrong sibling to have carnal knowledge of. So that's as far as I got. That would be the first chapter of our story of how God created the world. There's so much more to say. There's so much more wonderful things that I could tell you about the magnificence of God and his creation of the planet Earth. But we'll just have to save that for a different day. I just hope that you understand now that evolution is not true, because the whole thing about the inbreeding. And if you don't know what that is, you just have to ask your mom and dad what inbreeding is. And they should be able to clear that right up for you. So anyway, if you've been listening all the way through, you're very, very good. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.